operator of Streetwise driver training on the Gold Coast. She knows a little about the mature learner. Recording now, so this will be going, that would be the wrong version of Brooke. It's just not going so well today. I'm sorry for being so loose. Here she is.
I would say that approximately 10 to 15% of our students are possibly 30 and over. Of that, I would say 3/4 of them would be female. I would expect most of them are generally mothers. The motivation to getting their licence a little bit later in life is that they've got children to get to primary school or nurseries or kindergarten. So for whatever reason through their teens and 20s it wasn't necessary. A lot of the stories that we're told are, you know, they've either had a car accident earlier on in life and that's put them off and it's become, I suppose, shelved for later in life. And they've gotten to a point that they're more motivated by having children or life circumstances. Being a driving school on the Gold Coast, there's a lot of issues with public transport. So unless they're in a sort of a high residence area, that's another reason why people will look at, you know, being able to get children to school and kindergartens.
Let's talk about the first-timers first, and we'll come to those that are getting back behind the wheel. Do you find you have to teach a 37-year-old very differently to a 17-year-old, particularly when it's really their first time becoming a motorist?
Well, it's interesting, really, because there are two issues, positive and negative. The first, I suppose, on a positive, being more mature, they have different understandings of spatial awareness and motion and reaction time. They've spent enough time in a bus, on a bus, or as a passenger in a car. So they have a greater depth and appreciation for the traffic and the issues that occur on the road. This then branches into two issues. It either creates more anxiety because they've seen things, they've been on part of an accident, or they've just simply seen things. So that can create extra nerves and anxieties that we find that we have to spend a little more time going over, particularly the flow of traffic, speed control, vision, and observation, and moving away from the anxieties. Whereas teaching them manoeuvres, for example, is quite simple because they already have a sense of depth and perception that maybe a 17 or 18-year-old is still developing.
Would it be fair to say, Brooke, that an older learner driver might be less... When I say less...
So they're less risk-taking, I suppose, than a 17-year-old who just simply doesn't know what they don't know.
So how do you overcome that? How do you work with that?
In terms of the older generation, I think it's more about repetition. We talk a lot, so it's about the conversation on the road as we're going. We're talking about what other cars are doing. We're talking about prediction and anticipation and judgment and traffic flow and how those things come to impact the decisions that the mature driver is having to take on a give way or a stop. I'm actually sitting at Southport Test Centre at the moment. I have a 30-year-old that's out having a test right now.
So what's that like for you? Tell me what that's like for you, Brooke, because are you like a nervous parent, an expectant parent while this is going on, and you can't be part of it, so it's off and they're out in the world without you there?
Absolutely. We love what we do, so you buy into the reasons why people are doing this, whether it's an 18-year-old or a 30-year-old. The life story that somebody 30, 40 or 50 has is it has far greater depth and interest, and their motivations for learning to drive aren't so typical. And so, yeah, you are like the auntie or the mother waiting with bated breath. It's lovely, and so you do buy into the emotion when they come back and they pass, and there's tears and cuddles and all of that. So it's a really nice part of their lives to be privy to.
Do you think the driver testers, so the person who will test... The examiner, I beg your pardon, thank you very much. Do you think they test or examine a 36-year-old driver, a 46-year-old driver differently to a 16, 17-year-old?
I would like to think not. I think it's a fairly standardised test because they're not actually looking to understand the life story or the history of the 37-year-old person that's arriving to do the test. They're not asking why they're here, or what's brought them here, why they haven't done it before. They have to take it on face value that they're here, whether it be for the first time or not. So it is about road rules. It's about everyone needs to drive to an absolute standard that includes speed control and hazard perception and vision and observation. But underlying that, I would assume, as an adult myself, that you do have a preconceived idea that somebody that's coming for a driving test at 30 or 37 is going to have far greater peripheral vision or far greater motion judgment than somebody at 17 who's still developing their peripheral vision.
On 612 ABC Brisbane and 91.7 ABC Gold Coast, ABC Local Radio Queensland, you're listening to Brooke Calcagno, who is a driver instructor, and we're talking about learning stuff as an adult that you would otherwise learn as a younger person. So what about people who come to driving after they've been motorists, perhaps, as an 18 or 19-year-old, had a crash or for what, haven't had a car for some years or whatever it might be, and they come to you as, someone who is an older person. Brooke, how do you go about that, particularly, of course, with someone who has gone through an experience that has made them, a little gun-shy about getting back behind the wheel?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really big issue. We teach a lot of people who have been involved in or witnessed car accidents. So we teach a lot of people with anxieties and learning disorders who, whether they've had those experiences or not, what we find is we spend a lot of time in the discussion leading into the next thing that we're going to teach, whether it's getting out on a dual lane road, or whether it's handling roundabouts. You're able to approach these people generally in a more mature way, of course, because they are mature, but they're almost sometimes behind the eight ball in terms of those anxieties. We run a course, a nationally accredited course called Safe Drive, applying safe drive behaviours. And this is a half-day course, in addition to any normal 1 hour, 2 hour driving lesson, where they come away at the end of a half day with an accreditation in safe driving behaviours. And so we'll spend a lot more time with someone more mature in looking at their motivations for driving, the risks that they've seen in their lives, and addressing those head on in terms of what experiences they've had, whether they were part of an accident or they witnessed an accident. And we'll look at the physics behind what they're doing now that they're behind the wheel of the car. So braking distances and reaction time, and approaching those sort of demonstrated facts. So we'll actually look at emergency braking at 40 kilometres an hour and the braking and steering, and be able to apply the logic of vision and those hazard perception concepts that are a little harder to grasp as a 17-year-old.
Yes, I completely understand. What about getting them into traffic, for example? Someone who is very anxious about being behind the wheel after, for the first time in some time, Brooke. How do you get them back into traffic, or do you really need, in a sense, to just get them in the deep end and they have to just manage it? How do you manage that?
Well, it's a bit of both. Again, understanding the personality type of the person that you're teaching really helps us to determine what approach we're going to take. Let's say 50% of those people just are biting the bullet. They realise that they're at a point in their lives where they have to have their licence for X amount of reasons, and so they're more willing to get out there and give it a go to begin with. So that category of people, we will get out a little quicker, but we start with the same process, which is the quiet streets around home and learning to navigate their neighbourhood, in a car rather than on foot or on a bike, or however they've been doing it up till that point. So lots of repetition to build the confidence where they are more familiar. And then from there, depending on their anxieties, it's about pushing them. And again, we can have those conversations. The reason they come to a driving school like us is because we have dual controls and we are highly trained in being able to use them and communicate with them. so that we're constantly reminding them and giving them the confidence that we can brake for them, we can accelerate for them, or clutch change or whatever it is, depending on the vehicle, and that we're there for them. That's the whole point of paying for a driving lesson, that we're there alongside them every step of the way. But repetition is the key. Conversation and repetition.
Conversation and repetition. It's a bit like being on the radio. It's a bit like being a parent, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
We're surrogate parents.
In a way, you are. All right, so for someone listening to you now thinking, I would really like to get back behind the wheel, maybe you are an older listener who has not been a driver before because your husband drove, or because you've just never had the need to, or never had access to a car before. When you come to the fact that you've got to actually go and qualify for your L's first,
yes.
Is that something that's daunting as well for an older would-be driver, Brooke?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the older learner drivers get stuck at that process first. Again, given that a portion of our more mature learners possibly come from another country, English might be a second language, so the way that the written test is set out, they have to understand the language enough to be able to interpret the question for the road rules in the first place. So we've spent time in the car with more mature and international drivers, taking them for a drive where they might sit in the passenger seat, and we apply the logic of the road rules whilst they're in the car with us. So for someone with high anxiety or language as a barrier, we find that works really nicely. 1 hour in the car can be enough to just simply dispel any issues and confusions about stops and giveways, roundabouts, indicating off roundabouts, and the simple but important laws that we all have to live by, I suppose.
Brooke Calcagno there, the owner-operator of Streetwise Driver Training, who had a 30-plus patient, if you like, in being tested while I spoke to her earlier today. ABC Local Radio Queensland, it's 7 minutes to 2, and in just a moment, as an older person,